I'm Renata, and I am 29 years old. 4 years ago, I married my husband Douglas, and since then, we have been living together in an apartment, sharing our household responsibilities. Initially, I harbored dreams of a blissful married life, but reality soon proved otherwise. Although Douglas and I held differing values, I believed we could eventually harmonize our perspectives. However, the real challenge emerged not from our differences, but from mother-in-law Helena's unexpected interventions. The conflicts began just 1 month into our marriage. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, Helena appeared unexpectedly. Her surprise at seeing me preparing to leave so early was evident when she exclaimed, "What are you doing up at this hour, Renata? Were you planning to go somewhere?" When I informed her I was headed to work, she responded with a look of disbelief and remarked sharply, "You're married now. You're Douglas's wife. What are you thinking? Go back to your duties at home." Despite my confusion and frustration, Douglas offered no support. He simply said he was late for work and left, abandoning me to handle the situation alone. I tried to explain to Helena that I also needed to go to work, but she was relentless. "You are a wife now. Do your duty as a wife. You should trust your husband to provide and leave your job," she insisted, blocking the door. Desperate to leave, I apologized and asked her to lock the door and leave the key in the mailbox. Reluctantly, she took the key, and I managed to go to work. However, allowing her to stay in our apartment that day was a mistake. When I returned from work, she was still there, waiting. As soon as I entered, she commanded, "Sit down right there," in a stern voice that made me flinch. She then launched into a prolonged lecture about traditional marital roles, reiterating outdated values that no longer applied to our lives. When Douglas arrived home, she didn't spare him either. She admonished him, saying, "You are the husband. Show some dignity. If your wife does whatever she pleases, your family will crumble." Douglas, to my dismay, simply apologized to her without defending our choices. It became clear that Helena's views were deeply entrenched, reflecting a bygone era that clashed with our contemporary life. Despite her insistence on me quitting my job and adhering to her ideals, I knew such demands were unreasonable. Our struggle wasn't just about differing lifestyles or values. It was about asserting our independence and reshaping our roles in a way that respected both our aspirations and modern realities. Looking at the situation, I realized there was no benefit in heeding Helena's commands. But still, it left me feeling quite uneasy. I tried to discuss this with my husband Douglas after his mother had gone. I questioned him, "Why do you always just go along with what your mother says? She's forcing her idea of a perfect family onto us, and that's not fair." Douglas's lifelong deference to his mother was apparent. "I'm sorry, but I can't oppose her when she's so insistent. Can't you just do as she asks this time?" he pleaded. I was taken aback. "That's impossible. You know how crucial my job is. Next time your mother comes over, I won't let her in the house." Douglas panicked at that idea. "No, you can't do that. Mom will blame me, saying it's the husband's job to manage his wife." His response frustrated me further. "But isn't it true? We're in this mess because you won't stand up to your mom. Can you at least talk to your dad about this to get her to stop pushing her will on us?" Douglas hesitated, but Mom doesn't listen to Dad either, I countered. "See? Don't you see the contradictions in your mother's logic? She claims that if a wife does as she pleases, it'll tear the family apart, yet she's the one causing the disruption." My words upset him. "Don't speak ill of my mom," he said sternly, a rare glare in his eyes. "If you can show such backbone here, I wish you'd do the same in front of your mother," I replied. Despite everything, I acknowledged that choosing Douglas was my decision, and I still loved him. I resolved to try harder to get along with Helena. Reflecting on my past relationships, I realized they were all with domineering types, and those experiences hadn't been positive. I had thought Douglas's quiet and gentle nature would bring me happiness. Yet, his passivity often turned out to be a drawback. I believed I could shift our dynamics if I took charge. From then on, I balanced my job and home responsibilities impeccably. Still, there were times when Helena criticized my efforts. On one occasion, she accused me of neglecting the housework because of my job. In response, I invited her to inspect the house. Take a look around. Do you see any part of the house where I'm not fulfilling my responsibilities? I'm managing both my job and the housework quite well, don't you think? I asked, hoping to prove that I could handle both roles efficiently. When I explained how I was managing both my job and the household chores efficiently, Helena couldn't hide her irritation. Isn't Douglas helping you? She demanded, her gaze sharp as she turned towards Douglas. He went pale and shook his head. He had never been one to lie to his mother. She believed every word Douglas said, unaware that it was our little secret for him to pretend he wasn't involved in the household tasks. In reality, Douglas hadn't known much about housework when we first married, so I'd taken it upon myself to teach him. As Helena slipped on her shoes to leave, she muttered in frustration, "Even if things seem fine now, it doesn't mean they'll stay this way. I'm going to find proof." Her persistence was exhausting. Despite my efforts to maintain peace, she continued her surprise visits, always finding something to criticize. "Look at this corner! It's too dusty," she would complain, using it as proof that I was neglecting my duties because of my job. "Quit your job and take care of the house," she insisted. This routine dragged on for 3 years, wearing me down. Her inspections weren't limited to just the cleanliness of our home. She scrutinized everything from the fridge's contents to the organization of our wardrobe. It was bewildering how much she seemed determined to drive everyone around her to the brink. One day, as usual, she arrived unannounced and started rummaging through our fridge. "What? There's nothing in here. You can't even cook a decent meal for Douglas. Quit your job already," she scolded. Just then, Douglas walked in, arms laden with shopping bags. Helena was taken aback by his timing. Shocked, she blurted out, "My God, Renata, what were you thinking, making your husband help with the housework?" With a calm yet firm voice, I replied with all due respect, "Sharing chores is quite normal these days. Families stuck in outdated ways are becoming less common." My words made her face turn red with anger as she started to yell, "You just do whatever you want and mess everything up. Disgusting! And you, Douglas, why do you let her do this? Man up!" Douglas's face turned pale as he set down the shopping bags. His shoulders slumped in silence. I couldn't help but think of how defeated he seemed. Then, addressing Helena with a firm tone, I continued, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, but isn't this behavior quite rude? Douglas and I are partners, equals in this marriage. As a married couple, my husband Douglas and I have always prioritized mutual respect and shared responsibilities. We've agreed not to overload one another, and I plan to continue working even after we start our family. I've expressed to Douglas the importance of his active involvement in parenting. We are our own family unit, distinct and separate from others, which is why I've respectfully asked for less interference from outside, particularly from his mother." Following a particularly tense discussion, Helena shook her head, defeated, and announced, "I'm done with this house," before she left. Afterwards, Douglas, looking rather sheepish, apologized to me. I reassured him, "You don't need to apologize. I've come to terms with who you are and I love you just the same. Don't worry about your mother, just be true to yourself." From that day, interactions with Helena ceased and her unexpected visits stopped. During a period when I fell ill and decided to visit the hospital, I took a pregnancy test on a whim, which, to my surprise, came back positive. The official tests at the gynecologist's office confirmed that we were expecting twins at 6 weeks along. I shared the news with Douglas first, and he was ecstatic. We then called our parents to share our joy, and everyone was thrilled for us. After a long absence, Helena visited, smiling more genuinely than ever before, and warmly congratulated me. "Renata, congratulations. From now on, I will support you in any way I can. Please don't hesitate to ask for help." For the first time, I felt a sincere gratitude towards her and thanked her genuinely. However, as the pregnancy progressed and the morning sickness intensified with the twins, I had to start my maternity leave early. During this time, I did what housework I could, and we received ample support from Douglas, my parents, and occasionally my in-laws. We learned that we were having 2 girls, and Helena eagerly purchased various baby items well ahead of the due date. Although she brought gifts more suitable for a 6-year-old, I thanked her for her thoughtfulness, appreciating her efforts to be involved. Everything seemed peaceful until one day, out of the blue, she remarked. So now Douglas can finally have a decent family. Her words caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but respond with a puzzled and slightly irked, "What did you say?" Her comment seemed to undermine the validity of our family up until that point, and I needed to understand her meaning behind it. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to understand the full scope of her comment. "I mean," she said, "you're going to be a housewife, right?" Finally. I wasn't sure how to respond to her expectations. She seemed to think that with the arrival of the twins, my new role was to become a full-time homemaker. She even mentioned that since Douglas was dealing with twins, he might find it challenging, but she believed it would drive him to work even harder. In her view, a good family dynamic meant that I would support Douglas and be a dedicated mother to our children. Her words left me feeling disgusted and frustrated. I sighed deeply, wondering if I would be fighting with her about this for the rest of my life. With a calm and blank expression, I decided to be upfront with her. "I'm going back to work after my maternity leave," I stated firmly. "What?" Her reaction was one of shock. "Are you lying to surprise me or something?" "No, I'm not," I replied. "Also, once I return to work, Douglas is going to quit his job. We've decided that Douglas will become a full-time stay-at-home father." She looked utterly bewildered. "What nonsense are you talking about? You're a mother and you don't want to raise your children yourself?" I explained. "My income is higher than Douglas's. Naturally, I will support him while I work. We both believe that this arrangement is what's best for our children." Her anger flared. She trembled with rage and faced me with a look I had never seen before. "This is impossible. It's unforgivable. You're making Douglas unhappy. I will make sure he divorces you." With those words, Helena stormed out of the apartment, leaving in a hurry as if she were escaping. When Douglas came home from work, his face was grim. "Mom was so annoying," he said. "She called me while I was at work and said that our decision was wrong. I don't know what she might do. She could go to extremes." Douglas suggested, "Renata, maybe you should go to your parents' house for a while and stay there with the twins. It might be safer." It was unusual for Douglas to make such a decisive suggestion, especially since he had been so nervous when proposing to me, barely able to ask, "Will you marry me?" I appreciated his concern and the courage behind his suggestion. "All right, I'll do that," I agreed. I informed my parents about the situation and prepared to have the babies in my hometown. While I was there, I called Douglas every day. It reminded me of when we were dating and would call each other often since we didn't see each other very frequently. Helena remained furious, even bringing divorce papers. Douglas assured her repeatedly that he would never divorce me. During this challenging time, Douglas made another suggestion, aiming to make things easier for me. His support was invaluable despite the unimaginable pain. He held my hand and encouraged me. I eventually gave birth to our baby girls. Douglas stayed at my parents' house until things calmed down. After a while, he returned to our apartment alone. Then, I received a phone call from Helena. "Hello, Renata," she said. "Douglas has come back, but he didn't mention you at all. Are you really planning to come back here?" Helena's voice was sharp, filled with anger. "For some reason, she's at our apartment right now. I'm coming home tomorrow with the babies," I said, trying to stay calm despite her hostility. "Don't come back," she snapped. "I don't want to see your face. You and Douglas are getting a divorce anyway. Why don't you stay with your parents?" I could sense her excitement as she spoke, almost as if she was eager to see us part ways. "Douglas went there to talk about the divorce, didn't he?" she asked, her tone brimming with anticipation. I couldn't help but chuckle at her reaction. "Please don't worry. But honestly, I don't think Douglas will be seeing you anymore." There was a brief pause on the line before she responded. "What? What are you talking about?" Haven't you heard from Douglas? I asked. It seems that you and Douglas are no longer mother and son. We're moving out tomorrow. I could hear the confusion and disbelief in her voice. Have you seen any cardboard boxes for moving? No, she replied. I haven't seen anything like that. The room looks clean, but that's only because Douglas worked so hard to tidy it up. At that moment, I faintly heard Douglas's voice in the background. It seemed like he had put the call on speaker, and his voice became clearer. Sorry, Renata, Douglas said, sounding apologetic. I didn't expect Mom to call you. It's okay, I reassured him. Don't worry about it. How's the packing going? Almost done, he replied. I thought it would be a hassle if Mom came over and caused a scene, so I hid the boxes and finished packing quietly. That's great, I said, relieved. I'm sorry you had to go through all this. Just then, Helena started yelling from the other end of the phone. What on earth are you talking about? Douglas, don't tell me you're moving out and cutting ties with me. Before I could respond, Douglas's frustration boiled over. No, Mom, you need to be quiet. I've had enough of your interference. All you do is impose your own rules on us, and you don't understand the trouble you're causing. We're done with this. That's why we've decided to cut ties with you. He continued, his voice firm. And when did you even make a duplicate key without our permission? Give it to me so I can return it to the management company. His mother's voice was filled with disbelief. What? Are you divorcing Renata, or are you just saying this to me now? Divorce? Douglas' voice was steady. I never said I'm divorcing Renata. She earns more than I do, and we both agreed it's best for our family if she continues working while I stay at home with the twins. Helena's anger was palpable, but if Renata becomes a housewife, we wouldn't be a decent family. The girls would have to put up with so much. It's just one moment's income. Renata's father and brother may indeed be running the show, but that's beside the point. Douglas remained resolute. We've made our decision, and it's final. We're moving on, and we hope you can understand that. Helena had always been quite adamant about her views, but it was clear she didn't know the full story. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to clarify things. You know, I began. I didn't mention this earlier because I anticipated you might make a big fuss. I work for my brother's company. He's planning to start a new venture soon, and eventually, I will be taking over his company. Her response was a mix of surprise and disbelief. Wait, you mean a woman will be the president? Yes, that's right, I said calmly. For now, I'm focusing on supporting the company. I'll be back after my maternity leave. I thought we had discussed this before. I had indeed mentioned it during our wedding preparations, but it seemed she might have forgotten. Helena looked stunned and was unable to respond for a while. Then Douglas spoke up. Oh, by the way, Peter works for Renata's brother's company. This piece of information shifted the conversation. If you have that attitude, Douglas continued, what do you think will happen to Peter? Peter was Douglas's second brother and worked as a sales manager at my brother's company. It was a small world. I'd met Peter at the wedding and learned he was Douglas's brother. Hearing this, Helena's voice trembled as she said, Oh my God! I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please, don't fire Peter. He's struggling with 4 kids right now. I almost laughed at her plea. No, I can't just fire an employee because of a threat. But really, please don't interfere in our family matters anymore. We're cutting ties with you, so it doesn't matter anymore, I added. Despite my words, Helena continued to rant, but Peter seemed to have ended the call abruptly. The next day, my parents dropped me off at our new house with the twins. The movers had already finished unpacking our furniture and boxes, and my parents helped me settle in. Later, my father-in-law visited us. After Douglas cut ties with Helena, my father-in-law decided to do the same. Helena's old-fashioned values had not only affected Douglas, but also influenced my father-in-law and his 2 brothers. It was clear that her actions had a ripple effect throughout the family. This time, Douglas, who had always been the quiet and obedient son, rebelled against her, and his brothers followed suit. My father-in-law also left the house and began preparing for a divorce with a lawyer. It seemed Helena had been abandoned by the entire family. Douglas had quit his job to focus on taking care of the twins, and I was doing my best to contribute as well. Considering our children's future expenses, it made more sense for me to work rather than for Douglas. Despite the criticism and opposition from others, I remained committed to the decisions Douglas and I had made together. We are determined to build a happy family of our own, regardless of the challenges.